Yeah, philosophy.
Are we talking about the philosophy? All right. Well, welcome back again, Triba, to another week of Philosophy Club with Garrett Dailey. Definitely, hands down, one of our best events. I love this time of the week. Everybody seems to get great value out of it because we get to talk about whatever is relevant to the community, current events. But we also get into some really metaphysical stuff and abstract concepts that Garrett's able to break down. He's really amazing at breaking down complex ideas into simple, easy to understand words sometimes. So I will try to keep this on topic. we try. Recently, we've had some discussion in here. Tabalo, I know, is already warmed up and ready to go, man. He's been philosophizing for the last 30 minutes with Bane. So we should have some interesting discussion going on today. I'm excited.
Did we had a topic last week that we were going to continue this week, I think.
Yeah, we were just talking about this. I was supposed to take notes.
Did you?
I didn't take notes.
All right. Well,
let's go back and watch the clips.
We do the same thing we do every week.
Figure out what to talk about.
Make it up on the spot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. So,
anybody have ideas, suggestions? Drop them in chat. Pop up the chat here. What is this attachment?
This could go to the ethical, moral side here because it goes into this gray zone of business or crypto or investing, and it has to do with Sam Bankman-Fried and how he just recently got arrested. And then one of my friends essentially is kind of saying the reason they indicted him is to like basically wipe the hands clean of Gary Gensler, the SEC chairman, because he's like implicated since he was involved in this. And then also at a recent hearing committee where they had what was his name? John Ray. He's the CEO that took over after him, that he did like the Enron cleanup, and he's basically a CEO. They called it like clean up all the fraud companies. He was saying it was worse than Enron because they're a multi-billion-dollar operation. They were using QuickBooks. For anyone that knows, QuickBooks is for small to medium businesses. Usually when you get past like 10 million, you don't use QuickBooks.
That's like using Google Docs for your project management at scale.
Yeah, for like a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And yeah, so he was saying it was worse. They were just like invoicing through Slack, and there was lack of records with everything. So the governance was basically, there was none, which he claims it made it worse. And then one thing that happened during that same committee event in Congress was that Maxine Waters tried to end it early before all the sort of committee members got to speak and interrogate into the situation, which there's also historical pictures of like Maxine Waters getting donations, plus her relationship with Sam Bankman-Fried in this specific context of FTX. So I guess with that said, Garrett, I want to hear you.
That is not a philosophy club topic, unfortunately.
Yeah,
although very good news.
You have that's a good plug for your event later today.
You have your own event.
You have your own event, Tabalo. Jeez, way to hijack Garrett's event.
I will say though.
Well, maybe we could philosophize over whether or not Sam Bankman actually did anything wrong, and maybe should be tried. I don't know.
I feel like a lot of people won't understand this, though.
Several life sentences or put to death. The end. Moving on.
Yeah. No.
The other thing you can look into if you feel like it. There's an evidence lockup in New York that went lit on fire, and they said, "Oh, it'll be burning for several days," and it seems like that probably was evidence related to the case.
Dang.
So I don't know if you want a conspiracy out on that, go for it. Let's see what's going on. We could do.
We got a lot of people here. What's up, fam?
Psychopaths. We could do
the philosophy of this shirt. Can you give me the philosophy of this shirt? It is a dog.
A dog's mouth. Yeah. No. Big dog. I'm saying the big dog.
If we're just doing random topics, yo, we got Kareem in here, Karen, Werner, Dave, Ollie, Alex, Samantha, Shaquille, Tabalo, Zach, Liam, Matthew's here. What up, Matthew?
This is our biggest philosophy club in a long time.
Dude, I told you it's going to be popping off today. This is our best event.
An introductory kind of thing then for the noobs.
Yes.
Welcome, noobs. Welcome to Philosophy Club. We talk about big things. for a little bit.
Drop some emotes. You can do emotes now if you pop out chat.
All right. Today we're going to talk about why philosophy is important. So if you are not super familiar with philosophy, you're probably not super familiar with philosophy because it's not like something that they teach in school a lot. And if they teach you anything, it's like if you're getting an advanced degree, they'll probably make you take an ethics class in your target field, right? So you'll take some AI ethics if you're in AI. You'll take journalism ethics in journalism, right? And based on the stuff that people do and say about AI and journalism, I don't know how effective that is, but that you can debate that yourself. um, in the original meaning of the word, philosophy comes from the Greek philosophia. Philo means love. Like if you say, um, Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. Philo Adelphi, right? Adelphi is brother. So Sophia is wisdom. Uh, Sophia is in other uses, like there's a Gnostic, not a deity, like a mythical figure called Sophia that's like this personification of the reason the world is fucked up. But that's a different topic. Gnosticism is several levels above the intro class. So
If you want to
it's
know
kind
more,
of
go to
this idea.
ion.enterprises.
Yeah, you'd have to read a lot of the blog articles to get to that. That's not like entry level stuff. But philosophy is originally the love of wisdom. The idea, in actually every single field of study that exists at one point was called philosophy, right? So when Pythagoras, for example, was doing philosophy, several thousand years ago, Pythagoras invented a lot of geometry and the Pythagorean theorem. And that's because Pythagoras thought that math was magic. It was this sacred thing, and the universe is made out of geometry and stuff like that. So he didn't call it, it wasn't a separate field. He was doing philosophy. It was just like a mystical philosophy and all that kind of stuff. And he didn't like beans very much either. That's a trivia question for you. Pythagoras hated beans.
Flip it.
And so when it starts out, philosophy is just when people are looking at the world and they're interested in learning about it, right? So everyone, in a very, very limited and loose sense, is a philosopher. We just are all bad at it at first, right? And lots of people who get paid to do philosophy are also bad at it. It is not necessarily very easy to be good at. A lot of famous philosophers in history are also quite bad. And it's because it's not something that a lot of people do. So the people that tend to do it tend to be crazy. And they tend to have lots of really like thoroughly thought out ideas about stuff that are obtuse and poorly worded and hard to understand and redundant and unnecessary. And then there's some good stuff too. So there's some Socrates through Plato, like, you can't read Socrates, but Plato talks about him a lot. And Plato may or may not have made up a lot of shit that Socrates said because it was actually Plato saying it. But Plato's got some cool stuff. Aristotle's got some cool stuff. Nietzsche's got some cool stuff. But at any rate, what is the point of philosophy? Well, if you're doing it the right way, it's because you're interested in learning about the world. You want to understand how things work. That's really what it should be. What it is, a lot more than that, though, is typically people saying, "This is how I think the world works, and this is how I think everyone should do everything." And generally, those people are not qualified to do any of that. So you get interesting results because what tends to happen is a philosopher comes along and writes or teaches or does something. And over the next 100 years, because the only people that are going to philosophy classes are very, very smart academics, then those academics tend to get jobs in academia. They become professors. They teach that philosophy to their students. Their students tend to be highly educated professionals, so doctors, lawyers, politicians, whatever. And over about 100 years, the philosophy goes from the philosopher who it came from, and into society, right? So you may notice nowadays there are lots of ideas about stuff like AI and gender and that the universe is a simulation and stuff like that. And all of these ideas actually have been things that people in philosophy have been talking about for 50, 100 years, right? Philosophers are the idea producers, but the supply chain for ideas is very slow moving, right? People tend to be vehicles for ideas to kind of like hitchhike on, right? The ideas need humans to exist, but ideas also exist outside of individual humans, right? So Sam and I and Tabalo and I can all have the same idea, and if I die, that idea exists, right? If 100,000 people have the same idea, that idea will probably have a life of its own, right? It can spread, it can change. And so the field that deals with how ideas work like that is called memetics, which is the study of memes. And memes are not just like funny memes that you see on the internet or on social media, right? Memes are concepts and they kind of have a life of their own. You can look into that. I won't, memetics is really, really, really complicated. Memetics is one of the most new and novel fields in philosophy. The word meme was originally coined by Richard Dawkins in his book The Selfish Gene, which is a book about genetics, and he argues that ideas work like genes and they mutate and have survival strategies and stuff. And I tend to think that that's relatively accurate. But that would be that's a jumping off point. If you want to learn about memetics, I've written a bunch of articles about it, and it's really hard to learn about. It's not a formal discipline yet. I think there's maybe one school that teaches anything about memetics, and most of the people that study memetics are like the CIA or intelligence agencies who are trying to develop like weaponized narratives and propaganda and stuff like that. So that's all interesting. We could talk about the dynamics of ideas, but ultimately that's not really what philosophy is about. It's not about the super abstract, heady stuff. Philosophy, in what I think is the best definition, should be related to how do you live a good life, right? I think just loving wisdom is a limited view of what philosophy should be, right? If it's just about that, then you could just read all the books that you want for your
Right.
entire life and sit in a cave and not do anything. And I think that's really naive and dumb. And ultimately, ideas need to be acted on, right? It is, if you have $100,000 or $100 million or $100 trillion and you never spend it, it doesn't matter that you have that money. It doesn't do anything, right? And similarly, if you have thousands of good ideas, it doesn't matter if they're not acted on, right?
Mm-hmm.
In philosophy, there's a central kind of problem that has been going on for a very long time, which is called the mind-body dichotomy. This comes from as far back as basically Socrates, but it shows up again from time to time. And it's currently a big problem that people have now. The premise of the mind-body dichotomy just means like it's kind of like a paradox or a split. What the mind-body dichotomy means is that people think that you are a mind and a body separately. So some people think the universe is all in your head and it's a simulation or it's an illusion or it's some kind of like metaphysical prison or stuff like that. That would be the mind part. Some people think the body half is true and they think that the mind isn't real, that the world is totally made out of dead matter and that consciousness is an illusion. And you can see they're contradictory, right? I tend to think the mind and the body are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And it's important when you think about this stuff because it sounds like kind of an abstract, weird concept, but then you realize that everyone talking about the simulation theory is in that dichotomy. Everybody who's talking about pure science and not no consciousness is also in the dichotomy. It's very, very, very common. Ultimately, thought and action, mind and body, are part of the same thing. You need both, right? So one of the things that I do a lot with philosophy is business philosophy, because if you look at all of the kinds of people in the world, um, if you had to pick a philosopher or an entrepreneur, who do you think is going to have a larger impact on the world? Well, if the philosopher is just teaching classes and maybe has, 30 students a year or 30 students a semester for the 20 or 30 years that they teach, it's like, okay, that's a couple hundred people, maybe a couple thousand people, right? But an entrepreneur, if they invent a new technology, they can impact everyone in the world. So it's imperative that people who are impacting the world through entrepreneurship have good philosophy, because that's the difference between having good things happen all the time or bad things happen all the time. SBF is a great example of someone with a terrible philosophy. He's actually was relatively involved in philosophy in a certain group called effective altruism, which they call that EA a lot of the time. But effective altruism is pretty awful philosophy, and you can see that all the people that were involved with it are, they're in like a weird polygamous sex cult, and they're doing lots of drugs and ruining people's lives by stealing their money. And it's like, oh, that's actually effectively not altruism. So that's kind of weird, but that's worth looking into. That's a little bit more of a rabbit hole than I really want to go down. But yeah, so I think now that we've kind of established a little bit about philosophy, a little bit why it's important, which is it should be, how do you live well? How do you act in a way that's consistent with ethics, with morals, with virtues, and accomplish your goals, right? I want to open it up to any questions, because I know we have a lot of new people here, and I probably ranted a little bit too much, and there was a lot of stuff in there. And if anyone has any questions, we'll go in that direction.
Nice. I mean, that was a solid intro. I got some actual clips here to put out there so people know about this event. I mean, we discuss things that are really impactful for business development. Sorry, I was turning my camera back on. And brand development. It's helped me incredibly. I mean, Triba's whole brand and positioning that appeals to y'all being here is built around these ideas of philosophy being at the core of any good business practice. So very important that you pay attention and ask the questions you have to Garrett, because he's spent years and years and years refining this process. I mean, who do you know is a full-time philosophy expert? Like, I don't know anyone else personally, and you have a direct line to talk to this dude who's worked with some really big companies. So ask your questions. I mean, what is your business philosophy? I mean, that if you want to unmute and share it, you feel like you have an impact-driven business, now's the time to talk about it. Both people on the stream and here can learn about it and share in that journey. You need to have a mission and a vision to get people on board, and that's what this is all about. That's why we host this every week. And
you can throw it in the chat too if you don't want to.
Yeah, if you don't want to unmute, that's totally fine. Samantha's definitely has a vision and a passion for helping people. I love it. Looks like she might be typing there. We'll give everybody an opportunity. Let's see if anyone's saying anything on the stream. Y'all can go to Triba Business Community on Twitch or YouTube. Check out the live stream if you ever missed this event. The VODs are on there too. Surprised we're not getting more people sharing. I think people are really... we got a lot of people digesting what you just said, because that was a lot, and I clipped some of it all.
A lot.
In events chat, I'm actually putting in there best clips of the week. There's some from BU's stream on Monday. There's some from this one. We do streams almost every day in here. Y'all know that. How does morality play a role in business? I'll let you handle this, Garrett.
Yeah, let's see. So I'm going to start with AJ's post, and then Samantha, I'll get to yours after, because I think I could hit his quicker. So how does morality play a role in business? So there is a common misconception. This is people really tend to think this. This is a widely held belief that that to get ahead, you have to do unethical things, right? You've definitely heard somebody say that. There are a lot of movies that come out where there's like the evil corporate overlord guy, right? And if you've ever done any amount of business, you will notice that doing bad business, doing evil shit, is actually a really great way to not do more business. It doesn't really work that well. And so
the government.
Peaky Blinders.
unless you're already wealthy, right? Which is different, and I'll touch on that in a second. But there's a really good, I don't know who came up with this concept originally. Simon Sinek has a book called The Infinite Game, which I have 2 copies of for some reason. You can check that out. It's a good book. But basically, the premise of that is that imagine we are all playing kickball in elementary school, right? Or dodgeball. So if we're playing dodgeball and Tabalo has a really strong arm and really knows how to like whale people in the face, just like whack the shit out of kids in the face with a dodgeball, right? Every single time he could throw a perfect headshot. Well, if Tabalo only throws headshots, then at a certain point, everyone is going to be really sick of playing with Tabalo because you just know that he's just going to play the game to beat the shit out of everyone, right? It's not a good way to do it. The premise of the Infinite Game is that the goal is not to win. The goal is to get invited to play more games. And how do you play games in a sustainable way over time? So morality, when you think about it, we tend to think that morality is just doing the right thing or like what's the right thing to do. Morality is actually a set of instructions that says this is the most sustainable way to behave over time. Meaning, don't steal, right? If you steal somebody's shit, they are not going to invite you back over and they're probably going to call the cops. If you kill someone, you're going to jail, right? If you commit high-level financial fraud, you're going to get arrested in the Bahamas. Doing unethical things over time damages your relationships with others, your relationships with your clients. If you're, selling low quality products, you probably won't get repeat customers. And so morality is not even like, it is so central to business. It's so important because if you want to do things correctly, you want to do things correctly over time. And if you want to do things correctly over time, well, that's what morality is how do you do the right thing over time? So, for example, where morality becomes more complicated is when you start looking at scales of time that are very large, right? So it's different if I am, let's say, I'm walking through the woods in the middle of nowhere and I am like, have my, I'm wearing like a ghillie suit or some other, camouflage or something where no one knows it's me. There's no DNA evidence or anything. And you come across a guy that you're never going to see again, right? In this scenario, you rob this guy, right? You can take all of his money. You could like murder him and leave him in the woods or something like that. And no one could ever prove that you did it, right? Well, obviously, we generally consider murdering and robbing people to be bad things in society. But in this scenario, you could get away with it. Well, let's say you do. Okay. In this scenario, there's nobody to catch you. There's no consequences for it. That's not really how the world works. In reality, you go in the woods, you do bad stuff, you get caught, and then you cannot continue to profit in that way. So when you start looking at longer spans of time, you can do bad things and get short-term gains, but the long-term consequences of doing bad things are always worse, which is why we consider them to be bad in society, right? So people are not really good at thinking about long-term things. We're really not. There's a test that a psychology test they do on kids where it's called the marshmallow test, where you sit down kids in a room with nobody and you leave a marshmallow on a plate and you tell them, hey, if you don't eat this marshmallow, I will give you 2 marshmallows when I get back. And then you leave the room and let them sit there. The kids who are the best at not eating the marshmallow, the ones that can succeed if they leave them in there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, actually later in life will be much more successful because they're able to think about long-term consequences and benefits, right? And the way that they do this is by looking away from the marshmallow. So if you don't want to do something, don't look at it. Avoid thinking about it, right? And you'll be better off because if you sit there and stare at the marshmallow, you're going to eat the marshmallow. That's kids, and that's a span of like maybe 5 minutes. Generally, people can think about things in the span of like a couple weeks, couple months, maybe a couple years. But living in the world is actually about time, right? You have to think about long-term consequences. Like, hey, if I smoke 3 packs a day, maybe I like smoking 3 packs a day. but then you die in 20 years because of cancer and you have a really long and painful death, right? If you are a company that's polluting the ocean, like maybe you make a shit ton of money now, but then maybe it won't happen in your lifetime, but you destroy the ecosystem. Now nobody can eat fish. Now the planet's it kills everyone, and then your kids suffer, right? So the ideal kind of mindset to have with ethics is as long of a timeline as possible, because when you're looking at ethics, it's not about what does a random person do in the moment. It's about how do the consequences of single actions impact people over time. An interesting one with this, and then I'll wrap this up and answer Samantha's question, is like suicide, for example. Um, People think, especially people who are suicidal, think everyone would be better off without me, or other untrue things. But actually, uh, one suicide causes many more suicides. So there's like basically within the week after suicides in the area spike, like quite a bit, and then it goes down and it spikes again a couple weeks later. And they've studied this, and this seems to be the case, that whatever you do, whatever action you do, good or bad, other people imitate your action over time. If you kill yourself, you will inspire other people to kill themselves. If you do good things, other people will do good things. And so your morality is not just about you, right? What you do sets the stage for everyone around you to act the same way as you, because people imitate others, right? Most people are not original thinkers, and that's okay. We're not designed to be, right? We imitate the examples that were set for us. We live in the way that we were trained to live most of the time. And you can get better about being original and being changing the way that you act by using your mind and by analyzing your thoughts and these kinds of things. But in a basic sense, morality isn't just about you, it's about everyone, because if everyone acted the way that you acted, would the world be better or worse, right? That would be it. But it's very important in business, is the takeaway. Samantha.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt, Garrett. Hey, this is Dave, Dave P, Trader Dave.
I did.
Yeah, I mean, you're 1,000% right. If somebody is a nightmare to do business with, you're just better off just moving on, and you want to have relationships over the years. If you ever need help, you're in a pinch, or if a friend can call you, you need to be there for them as well, right? And you'll develop relationships where people would come to you, hey, I've got this problem, or hey, I'm kind of out here, can you help me? And it's just a big kind of a like, it's like, the saying, like, Led Zeppelin, right? I mean, I'm a little bit older, but he said, when all is one and one is all, I mean, there's really this one energy, and everything's very interconnected, and yeah, I mean, yeah, it's some pretty interesting how it all works when you start to recognize it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's actually why my company is called Ion. Originally is AIO, is all in one. So very much dead on.
Wow, I didn't actually know it stood for all in one.
Well, it's a couple things, but it was that
Yeah.
before I learned the word ion, the Greek word ion, later. But it was IO first.
Wow.
Like the symbol on the wall right here is the IO symbol, right? That was the first part. So okay, so AJ, great response. You don't want to be Thanos on everyday life issues. Yes, don't be Thanos. Thanos is a utilitarian, by the way. That's Utilitarianism is bad. If you ever forget why, remember Thanos is a utilitarian, right? Utilitarianism, like effective altruism, is a terrible philosophy. Samantha, how do you think
Hey, Garrett,
Mhm.
do you think that they named it effective altruism and then they abused the name,
No, it's whenever. Here's the thing.
or tell me where it went wrong? Yeah.
Yeah, anybody who talks a lot about altruism, you should be very cautious around. This is kind of a weird thing. This is it's almost like double standarding, but there's a double standarding way that you work with yourself that is very beneficial, right? You should not use double standards against other people. At all times, you should treat other people with a more forgiving frame, and you should hold yourself much more accountable. You should assume that you're a bad person, that give everyone else the benefit of the doubt, right? Because if you assume that other people are bad, you're being prejudicial, right? And you may miss the opportunity to give somebody grace or something, right? If you assume that you're bad, you're going to be very cautious, right? And people have the tendency to assume that everyone else is worse than them and that they're infallible and great. So you have to counteract that by giving other people the benefit of the doubt and then not giving yourself the benefit of the doubt. You have to treat yourself as if you're wrong and prove that you're not, rather than the other way around. Because our default is that we assume that we're right, and that's a very dangerous way to be. The effective altruists and the utilitarians, people start talking about the greater good, right? And the problem with the greater good is A, what is good? B, greater for who? C, who are you to say what's good for anyone? Who put you in charge? Why are you qualified to make this decision, right? And so you can apply this to the effective altruists, you can apply this to utilitarians, but anybody who starts talking about the greater good should be immediately ignored, or you at least like watch your back around them, because they're on some kind of moral high horse. They assume that they're qualified to make these abstract massive decisions for other people, and that's a bad way to be, right? You can also see one of the problems with these kinds of like philosophies that look really good on the outside is like, oh yes, we're great, we're altruistic, we're wonderful people. Like say SBF said in an interview, he's like, oh yeah, I just had to say that because that's the kind of shit that people want to hear. So yeah, I just anytime somebody starts talking about really big, like big happy morality that doesn't include lots of self reflection, or even self deprecation is not the right word, but like aggressive self analysis, you should always like deal with yourself first. If you are working on making yourself better, like we explained earlier, everybody around you will follow your example, and you lift people up by making yourself better. But if you try to fix other people, you're not qualified to fix anyone if you're not perfect. And if you're not perfect, why are you trying to fix other people first, right? So do your shit, and then everybody else will benefit. Imagine the example I used to give my blog before. All of my stuff's on Ion Enterprises now, but my blog used to be called Master Self. And the central premise of that, my tagline was save the world, master yourself, right? Save the world by mastering yourself.
Yeah, I've got a book here, Garrett. It's called The Mastery of Self. It's a really great book.
By I know who's that by Napoleon Hill or
let me see. Miguel Ruiz Jr.
Ruiz. Oh yeah. I have
Yeah, it's like an orange and brown book, and yeah, this is really interesting. It talks about the societal expectations versus the needs of the individual, and yeah, very interesting.
I have something from him around here somewhere. I don't know where it is. Apology, otherwise I'd pull it out.
Yeah,
But yeah,
you're absolutely right. You need to master yourself, and you shouldn't. I mean, if somebody is really hard to deal with or something, like maybe you you can get frustrated with them, and you can maybe suggest something, but like you can't expect anybody to change, and you can't force them. Yeah, so I mean, and you just can only work on your reaction to them, and letting if somebody is hard to deal with, just not letting it get to you, or just having to deal doing to in focusing on being that example again, right? Yeah. So
yeah. I mean, that's ultimately, I think that's the most beneficial thing, because the world is two things. The world is what it is, and the world is what you think it is. And the further apart those two things are, the more fucked up you're going to be, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
So, but our experience of the world is mediated through ourselves. So you can never get perfectly to understanding what the world is. You can just move what you think the world is closer, right? And so, how do you change what you think the world is? You think about it. You analyze the world. You analyze yourself. I'll paste this in here and I'll explain this briefly. This is kind of a little graph that I came up with a while ago that explains like the different fields of philosophy and how they work. I call this the candy cane, the philosophical candy cane. But give me, and it's not uploading for some reason.
Side note, I just made a Garrett emoji. I don't know why we haven't had you as an emoji.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna post it. I'll see if I can post this in co-working chat because in the regular chat, it's not letting me post it. It's not letting me post it at all.
What is it?
I don't. Let me see if I can send it to Sam, and then Sam can post it. It's Discord's giving me trouble right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna close out Discord and see. So basically,
Can
one of the
I go
things.
totally off the ranch with you, Garrett, real quick?
Go for it, and then I would like to answer Samantha's question as well after
Yeah.
this.
Go ahead. Yeah. Well, real quick. Um, you can actually create your own reality. I mean, and you really, I mean, I feel you can. I mean, you'd have to be brave enough to do it, but I mean, as long as what I'm finding, and some, again, I'm a bit older, but I'm starting to realize kind of I like what I can get away with. I mean, I go into a situation. I don't mean, really mean any harm to anybody, right? I mean, and I try to just be as benevolent as I can, right? And nobody's perfect, and I'm not saying that anything like that, but I'm just, but you can actually have a lot of fun with people, and you can as long as you're being helpful, like you can. Yeah, you look at who are the guys, the skateboarders, Jackass, right? Like the stuff they get away with, like you can get away with a lot, yeah, and you can really be anything you really want to be. You know what I mean? As long as you're happy being it.
Yeah, kind of, but not really.
Well, I
Sorry.
mean, there are things you have to have skills for. I mean, you can't. I'm not going to be a ballet dancer or something like that, but I mean, you can. You do have a lot more. A lot. I feel that people have a lot more influence over their life than they give themselves credit for,
I agree
or
with that.
take advantage of.
However,
You know.
I agree with that. However, you could never be a tiger, no matter how hard you try, right? So
I mean,
this is one of those
anything
things about
humanly, yeah, like an archetype.
reality.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, reality is always here. Reality is always what it is. It does not change meaningfully. It is just a fact, right? Your
yeah,
perception of reality can only you can move it further away or closer to reality, right?
yeah,
Um, so the way that I look at it, rather than trying to be whatever you want, you should try to be what you already are. Because people actually spend a lot of time trying to be something other than what they are, but what you're supposed to be is already in there, right? I'll
yeah,
tell you a story about this, and then I'm going to move on to
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love
Samantha's
to chat
question. So,
sometime. Thanks.
sure, yeah, I would love to. So there's a boy in the 1800s who he just likes looking at rocks and plants, and his dad is, I forget, either a doctor or a priest, like a minister or something, right? And this kid just wants to look at rocks and plants and bugs and shit. And his dad's like, "This is unacceptable. You're going to go to medical school." So he sends him to medical school. He's really bad at this. He barely graduates. And his dad's like, "You're a bum. I'm going to send you to divinity school and see, we're going to make you a priest or something." And he does that, and he's bad at it. And finally, his dad's like, "All right, I'm sick of your shit. There's a boat. You're going to get on this boat. They're going to go sail around the world, and maybe you'll die. I'm tired of dealing with you, right?" So he gets on this boat. This boat is the HMS Beagle. They sail around the Cape Horn of South America and go up through the Galapagos and stuff. And guess what? He has time to look at bugs and plants and rocks and shit. And he invents evolution, and his name was Charles Darwin, right? Or he discovers, rather. He doesn't invent it, right? And so at the essence, everybody has something that they are more interested in than everybody else, right? For me, it's philosophy. For Sam, it's community stuff. Whatever. Everyone has some affinity that basically the thing that working on it doesn't take effort, right? Your brain wants to do it. Your mind wants to do it. You're drawn to the thing. Whatever that thing is the thing that you will be able to work on for longer and harder than anybody else in the world because it's what you're called to do, right? And you don't even have this doesn't even have to be like a divine thing. It's literally just your body, your mind wants to do that thing. If you ever look at, they have like these fucking 3-year-old kids that are drummers now that can
Oh
drum better
yeah,
than me, right?
oh, yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like there's no way. Like I like playing the drum. I'm not very good at the drums, but I like playing the drums. But there's no way that I'm ever going to be as good as that kid already is. or will be when they're an adult because they love it. There's some kind of innate love for the
Yeah, I
thing,
mean,
right?
it's just in them, yeah. And I think things get passed genetically, and evolution passes genetically. Um,
Sure,
but yeah,
but at
totally
any
agree. I mean, I totally agree. Yeah, but some people don't know what their calling is, and some people are afraid to follow their calling. And if you feel like something is in you, do it. Yeah, you know.
well, and it's ultimately there's we make trade-offs. So if you don't know what your calling is, it's because you haven't self-reflected, which is again the early stages. Well, it's an ongoing process, but that's the beginning of self-mastery, self-reflection, right?
Yeah,
And if you're afraid to follow your calling, then what you're really saying is, I would rather pass off all of the fear to the end of my life and then deal with it right before I die. Because there's an article I wrote, a very, very one of the first ones I wrote, that was basically about there's a nurse who took records of all the regrets of the dying, right? And
yeah,
so the most common regret was not I didn't work enough. I should have made more money. I should have had nicer shit. The most common regret is I did not live a life true to myself. And so, if you know this, if you know the highest likelihood is actually nobody gives a shit about money or power or fame or anything when they're about to die, they actually want to be genuinely who they are, then you can choose right now, hey, you could do that thing that scares you, or you're going to die having wasted your whole fucking life, right?
yeah,
It's very
yeah.
simple. It's actually it's not a hard decision to make. And that's pretty much it. If that doesn't terrify you, if the thought of like getting to your deathbed and thinking, oh my God, I wasted my entire life isn't the most terrifying thing in the world, do whatever you
It's
want.
it's flipping horrible. Yeah,
All
yeah.
right,
No, I could see it. Thank you. Yeah, great chat.
moving on. Yes, thank you for asking. All right, Samantha's question. How do you think outside the box when so many people follow a cookie cutter format and only do what they have seen done? So that's very much on topic with what I was just mentioning, right? Um, the first thing I will say is it's not necessarily about thinking outside the box, right? So if you look in a really loose way, can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Good. Okay, cool, cool. All right. So it's not necessarily about thinking outside the box, right? You shouldn't start thinking trying to think outside the box, right? Because for example, this is how a lot of people become conspiracy theorists because they say, well, everyone thinks that XYZ happened, but I actually think that 1 2 3 happened or something crazy, right? Just because something is done by everyone doesn't inherently mean that it's bad or good, right? And this goes both ways. If everyone in the world jumps off a bridge, doesn't make it a good idea. If everyone in the world doesn't jump off a bridge, that doesn't mean you should just because you're trying to be different, right? Your goal is basically when kids are born, psychologically they do not know the difference between themselves and the mother, right? They think the mother is an extension of their own body, and this is very early on. But through childhood, through and before adolescence, they're psychologically identified with the parent. So kids want to be like their parent. They see the parent as like their self, like an extension of the self. When they become adolescents, they disidentify with the parent by trying to be the opposite of their parents. So kids become rebellious, they act out. If their parent is a Republican, they become a Democrat. If their parent's a Democrat, they become a Republican or something like that, right? However, that first stage is you have to move on from that. That second stage, you also have to move on from that. What does that look like? Well, you have to realize at the end of this that you are both like your parent and not like your parent. You're both part of them, literally. You're physically like made out of their genetics, right? And you're also your own person. And when you can have both of these things, like, hey, I can accept that I am like them and I'm not like them, then you become a real person who's fully integrated, right? When you're looking at anything in society, just being an outcast or a divergent thinker or an independent person isn't necessarily good. People are social creatures, right? However, the process of becoming a person first means that you're probably going to have to be a lonely individual, and that process can last for a very long time. People get stuck there though. So people either never do this at all and then they're a follower, which is probably not bad, but it would probably be better to be a follower than a lone weirdo in most cases, right? At least your life would be easier. So if you're not going to commit to doing it all the way, don't commit at all. Just stay where you're at. But if you're going to go become your own person, you have to be alone, right? And so in Jungian psychology, you have this notion of the basically three kinds of archetypes. There's the ego, the soul, and the self. So when you're when you're in these ego stages in your early life, you're developing a way to relate to other people. You're becoming a part of the group first, right? Hey, I'm one of the popular kids. I'm not one of the popular kids. I'm one of the nerds, one of the jocks, whatever. You develop this kind of identity, and it's based on your relationship with other people because you haven't become an independent person yet. Then you move into the adolescent stage, which is soul, which is about you when you're alone. It's who you are on the inside. And so this is like, where you break off in college and you find yourself, or you go out into the working world and you make yourself your own independent kind of person and stuff. But the goal is not to be just independent. We're all interdependent, right? We're both independent and interdependent. So when you complete this process, you get self archetypes, and self is the integration of the ego and the soul, right? The person you are to everyone else and the person you are when you're alone. When you integrate those things, you're a complete person, and that's the self, right? This is self with a capital S. So what that looks like is being willing to go along with the group when the group is right, being willing to go against the group when the group is wrong, right? And so ultimately, the process of thinking outside the box, like in the right way, is you have to learn how to be inside the box. You have to learn how to be outside the box. And you do this by doing the thing that you feel like you're supposed to do, even when it's unpopular, right? If you have something that you're really interested in researching that nobody else really cares about, or you have some weird skill that you want to learn that people say is stupid, do it. Do that thing, right? If you don't do that thing, then you'll never step outside the box in the first place. And honestly, if you're here, you're probably already somewhere outside the box. This is a strange group. If you're a bunch of like entrepreneurs, the normal person is never going to be an entrepreneur. They're never going to understand it. There are a lot of people that are like on Twitter or Facebook who are yelling at Elon because they don't understand how entrepreneurship works. They think he's just a big bad mean bastard. But
You
ultimately,
calling us weird, Garrett? Thank you.
yeah, but I use it as a
No,
compliment.
why
I
be
think it's a good
normal?
thing.
I'm good with that. Thank you. I appreciate
Well,
that.
you need to be
You made
both.
my day.
You need to be able to be both is the thing. This is where people
Yeah,
get
you do
stuck because I
totally.
think
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't think weird is a derogatory word. There is such a thing as too weird, and you also don't be the kind of weird that where women think you're weird. That's a specific. That means something else. That generally is creepy. You don't ever want to be creepy, right? But
Oh,
um,
I'm joking around. Yeah, no, why be normal? I say, but yeah, you have to be normal enough. But yeah,
you have to be you have to learn how to make the weird normal, right? It's
yeah,
not
there
about
you go.
being weird. Being weird and not normal is a net bad, right? If you're just
Yeah,
weird, you're gonna have a bad time. If you're just normal, you'll have a bad time, but you won't have a bad time till later when you have a midlife crisis or you die, right?
normalizing
It's
weirdness. Yeah, there you go. I like it.
well, and ultimately, there's another graph that I have. Word is different to Bala. That's different. Weird comes from magical, but word is fate. So that's a too deep for intro to philosophy club.
Weird
Let me
does come
find.
from that though.
It does, yeah, but
What's
not
that
in the
spell?
way that we. Here we go. All right, I'm gonna post another chart, and maybe I'll get back to the other chart. But so sanity is a weird thing. Remember when I was talking about the two, like, hey, you're what you think the world is and what the world is here. This chart is kind of like that, except over time you have what we'll call objective sanity, right? Reality, reality is hard to understand completely for whatever reason. It's made much harder because people don't understand the way the world works and they make it more complicated. But over time, society, which is here, and reality tend to diverge, right? People get more crazy over time. And then you have some exceptionally sane person that teaches everyone how to be sane again, right? You know, when Galileo is like, hey, the Earth is round and it orbits the sun. They put him under house arrest. They were like, this is totally wrong, and yet he was right. Um, so being sane in an insane world actually means that you're sane, or you're insane to everyone who's insane, right? Um, and that's kind of the thing. Like weird people are off. You know, not every weird person's right, and being weird, you're probably more likely wrong than you are right a lot of the time. But rarely someone is so weird that they end up being correct. And it's being willing to do that. Like you have to go through the process of accepting like, hey, I'm not crazy, I'm just early. um, but let me see, I want to see if I have a meeting after this, because I'm going to either have to wrap up or go through yeah, I have time. Okay, so I'm going to answer some more questions. Kareem, I'll get to you in a second, but it looks like we have one from Twitch. So, Arush Tube, how do you draw the line between giving the benefit of the doubt to people while also being cautious? Well, the way that I look at that is you should always plan as if everything in the world is bad, but act as if everything in the world is good, right? When you're making a plan to go on a road trip, right? If you plan like nothing will go wrong, you're going to have a bad time because nothing works perfectly, right? So when you're making a plan, you say, well, if we have a flat tire, do I have money to get a tire replaced? If, you know, do we have road flares? Do we have jumper cables? Do we have, you know, snacks in case we get stranded? Do we have enough gas? Do we have money for gas? Do we have money for a hotel? Whatever, right? Um, plan as if everything will go wrong. Act as if everything will go good, right? So when you're actually enjoying the road trip, if you're sitting there thinking about all the ways it could go wrong, you're gonna have a bad time. If you plan right, the trip will be good, right? And then you'll be able to be free to enjoy it. And you also know if things do go wrong, you have a plan for that. You can deal with it because you're prepared. Similarly, with people, when you're dealing with people, assume, you know, internally assume like, hey, here's all the ways that this could go weird, right? You think like, okay, if I'm doing business with someone, well, we have contracts to protect ourselves from that, right? You assume, hey, well, there are a lot of ways that they could actually screw us over, so we're going to write a contract so that we both agree that we don't want to screw each other over. That's what the point of a contract is, right? um, but then once you have a good contract, you can act like you guys are having a great time because you covered your ass, right? So the key is not to only give people the benefit of the doubt. And the key is not to only assume that everyone is a manipulative monster who's out to get you. Because if you do one of those things, you're going to be an idiot or a really miserable person, right? But you have to know that people are capable of really bad stuff. But if you live in a world where you act like everyone is capable of bad stuff, you're going to be a lonely, miserable person. You just have to be prepared and not expect everyone to be a stunning example of morality, right? You have to know what you're going to do if that happens and have healthy boundaries. Like, hey, we should treat everyone nicely, but should I give this person I just met keys to my house? No, probably not. Probably you don't do that, right? And that's where boundaries come in, which is just, you know, having clear expectations. And having boundaries is the same thing as doing contracts in business. Healthy boundaries are saying, hey, we agree that this is how I want to be treated, how you're going to be treated. If you don't like that, you don't respect me, and I probably don't want to be treated poorly by you. So you say, fuck off, right? Like, no, go do that to someone else, but I don't want it. You're not obligated to deal with other people's bad behavior. You should be tolerant to some extent, and you should be open-minded and forgiving. But if you continually let people treat you badly, it becomes your fault that it continues to happen, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. um, and that's different in certain, you know, in some circumstance, if you're married to someone that's like beating you every day, or other circumstances, like you're still a victim. That's not necessarily like, it's not your fault that you're getting your ass beat. However, staying in a victim mindset, staying in the everyone is out to get me and the world is bad and I'm a powerless person mindset, is ultimately a damaging thing to you and and others, right? You don't want to, like, you want to make sure that you can navigate to a position where you're not continuously being victimized because you're too kind or too trusting or whatever, right? But you want to
Yep.
still like cover your ass so you can be kind and trusting, right? um
And
so
because and when you give into that, it's like it's kind of a mentality of like forfeiting your agency, right? You're basically saying, you are no
Yeah,
force or influence or capable of changing or creating things. So you're
yeah.
like
I mean,
forfeiting that power.
ultimately, yeah. In the end, everyone gets what they want. Now, what does that mean? Most people don't know what they want. If you want to be a successful business person, and instead of going to networking events, developing an offer and marketing yourself and stuff, you sit on the couch and eat Cheetos. Well, actually, you didn't want to be a business person. You just wanted to sit on the couch and eat Cheetos. You thought you wanted that. You wanted to want that. People often don't know the difference between wanting and wanting to want, right? People want to want lots of things, but what people do is what they actually want, right? And there's reasons that you have to kind of self-reflect and figure out the reasons that you want what you want, which is complicated because it's like, well, do you want what you want because it's what you were told to want? Is it because you have some kind of subliminal thing, like you're punishing yourself, like, oh, I want to be a business owner, but instead I eat Cheetos because I don't feel like I deserve it, or because I hate myself, or because my dad never believed in me, or stuff. And you can solve these problems through reflection and honest analysis of your circumstances and understanding how you actually function. And it's kind of like you have to outsmart yourself, right? You kind of have to work in a way where you understand, like, oh, hey, I know personally, if I'm doing my life right, I'm going to eat, mostly meat, and I'm going to generally eat one meal a day. Like, I do best when I'm doing that. So if I if we've been going to a lot of Christmas parties out here in Austin, and it's like, okay, cool. Well, I should make sure that I eat dinner before we go, so that I don't just eat a bunch of like very, very nice cookies. Everyone's had very nice cookies and stuff. And it's like, okay, cool. If I eat dinner before we go, I'm not going to be like snacking on shit all day. And part of that is knowing how I am. I like know if I go to a party and I haven't eaten, then I'm probably going to eat whatever food is there. And so you have to outsmart yourself, right? Okay, so moving into Kareem's question. Oh God. What do you think about
Wait,
objective morality versus subjective morality?
Kareem's question. Can you hit that question from the Twitch chat?
I didn't I just do that?
Oh, you did? Okay, I'm sorry. I missed that. Was
Yeah.
that okay?
What do you
I'm
think about
clipping stuff,
objective
so
morality versus subjective morality? This is tricky. So that's a very good question, Kareem. Objective morality is something that I think people have yet to really figure out, because morality, what like the idea of good and bad, is in some capacity subjective, right? So we can try. I've spent a lot of time trying to answer this, and I'll try and answer this in a shorter way so that we can keep things moving. But let's start with, well, subjective morality is dangerous, right? If I think it's good to chop people's arms off, right, that might be good for me. It's certainly not good for people who like having arms, and it's certainly not good for society, because then we have a lot of people that have no arms and can't do work, right? So objectively, it's probably bad. But if we say morality is purely subjective, then you can do whatever you want, right? Um, so trying to do morality in a purely subjective way is bad. However, when we get into objective morality, it gets much more dangerous, because once you start saying that you have the ability to determine what morality is objective, is when you start doing fucked up shit. And this is where the um, ethical altruists or effective altruists are bad. The utilitarians are the worst at this, because then you get into stuff like the greater good, whatever. When I've tried to solve this, I think there's the basic premise that I've come up with that I think works pretty well, without leading into like tyrannical shit like the utilitarianism or behaviorism or whatever, right? There are three things that have to be true for something to be good. It has to benefit the individual, the collective, and life itself, right? So let's run through those. What benefits the individual? Well, if I'm the arm choppy guy, chopping people's arms off benefits me. Probably bad. It definitely hurts the collective, and it definitely hurts life itself, because life wants you to have arms. Otherwise, you wouldn't have arms. If you're born without arms, it's different. Like, life didn't want you to have arms. That's your thing to deal with, right? Okay, if something benefits the collective, right, we could say, well, we should take all the money that rich people have and give it to everyone else, right? Well, that benefits the collective. It certainly hurts the individual because now you have these rich people that probably were doing something useful with their money. If it's Elon, he's doing something useful with it. And if you think that's true, maybe SBF is not. So it depends, but it certainly hurts individuals, right? You have policies that are anti certain kinds of individuals. And that's that sort of thinking when you say something benefits group A at the expense of group B is the same thing as racism. It's the same thing as genocide. It's that sort of thinking gets very dangerous very fast, right? And depending on how you look at it, if taking money from SBF, probably a good thing because he stole it. But taking money from Elon, maybe that hurts life itself because we have less renewable energy or we don't go to Mars or something, right? And then life itself, right? So you could say there are things that benefit life itself in the sense like, hey, does this make the biosphere less polluted, right? Are we decreasing the net carbon emissions? Like that's probably a good thing, right? But it's really hard to tell. I was just at a presentation, and I don't know enough about the topic to say whether this guy was correct or not. But there was a economics professor who was talking about, carbon emissions went up, but actually the Earth is greener than it was 100 years ago because the plants like carbon and they're adapting. So when people talk about these kind of massive systemic things like the global biosphere or different ecosystems, we don't know necessarily enough to say whether something benefits life itself or not in many cases. However, there are some things that certainly are bad, like polluting is almost certainly bad. You wouldn't like shit on your bedroom floor. You probably shouldn't like pour chemicals into the ocean. That seems straightforward enough for me, right? But if you have these three things,
I've heard it both ways. No, I'm just kidding.
If you have these three things, you can assume like, hey, we're taking care of the individual, we're taking care of the collective. And actually, the right and the left tend to do one or the other, right? The right is more interested in taking care of the individual. The left is more interested in taking care of the collective. You need to do both. This is why politics are stupid. You need to be able to do both of these things. There are no paradoxes in nature. There are only paradoxes in the mind, right? But if you do these things and you also consider like what benefits life itself, like, hey, maybe putting hormonal birth control being in the water supply is actually bad because it's crushing people's testosterone levels and causing like birth defects and stuff. Like maybe that's bad for life itself if people are going to have babies that are less healthy, right? This is how I try to think about it. Similarly, another this is slightly different. This is a little bit more about human morality for you to think about, but there are basic things that human life needs to survive, which is water, food, shelter, reproduction, work. You have to work in reality. If you don't work, you're going to die, or someone else is taking care of you, but they have to work to take care of you, right? So if you think about those as kind of the basic things that make it harder for people to have water, food, shelter, healthy kids and good fulfilling work to do, then those things are probably bad, right? Bill Gates owning all the farmland in the world is probably a net bad for people who want to have the ability to be responsible for their own food, right? BlackRock and Evergrande and some of these other giant investment companies buying up all the private housing in the world is probably bad for people who want to have a place to live that they can own, right? And it's when you look at it like that, it's like, hey, does it make it easier or harder for the average person to have access to the things that they need to live a healthy, productive life? That's a pretty good metric, right? When you start trying to talk about the greater good, you start saying, well, some people should have the things for a healthy, productive life and other people shouldn't. The greater good is that everyone has these things. And if you're taking away from people having these things, it's a greater bad, regardless of who it's for, right? With the exception of people who are actively malicious. So like SBF, should he have access to these things? Definitely not. He is actively ruining people's lives, right? Another good metric too, at least this is not really how most people think about this, but I've thought about this a bit. The point of laws is that we agree in society that there are some rules you have to follow that prevent society from falling apart. Right now, there are too many laws, and a lot of them are really stupid. But in essence, there are some really basic things. Don't kill people. Well, if it was okay to kill people, then anyone could kill you at any time, and you could never be safe around anyone, right? If you're you walk into Starbucks and there's a guy with like a samurai sword, and he's like, hey, there's a 50% chance I'm just going to chop your arms off because I enjoy that. That would be bad, right? We can all agree it doesn't really work if everyone's allowed to kill everyone. Same thing with stealing, which is basically don't steal is the basis of private property rights. If you have a house and you have your kids in that house and your money or your food, and somebody can come in and take it, well, that's pretty bad. That causes a lot of problems. The basis of laws should be thought of in the sense of like, I agree not to do these things, and if I break these laws, then those laws no longer apply to me either because they're an agreement between you and everyone else. And we don't have this as a formal agreement. I think that's a weakness in the form of like legal thought that we have. But if me, if I and everyone in this chat all agree, hey, we're not going to kill or rob each other, that's the basis of civil society. We can all agree on that. Similarly, if I decide I'm like, hey, I'm going to rob everyone in here blind, everyone should frankly be allowed to rob me back. You should get your money back from me, right? Because I have not respected the law. The law should no longer apply to me, right? So that's about as much as I would like to say about objective subjective morality. There is something like an objective morality that exists. However, when people start getting close to trying to figure that out, it gets much more complicated and they start picking and choosing things that should apply to, and it's very dangerous. Subjective morality is more dangerous, however, because you can make up whatever rules you want. If you're honestly thinking about subjective morality and you have things that you don't want to do that might be acceptable to other people, that's probably a good thing. But if you use subjective morality as a way to do things that most people agree are bad, you're probably doing something bad, right? Let's see.
I think, like you said, it's good to have a mixture of both, and then have subjective morality, but don't do to others what you wouldn't want to be done to you. And I think that's where society is headed, anyways.
Yeah, and I think even in most cases, there's like the platinum rule, which I think is treat others the way that they would want to be treated. You
Right.
could, because you can argue, hey, if I want someone to chop my arms off, I should be able to chop everyone else's arms off. That's not a great basis for morality, right?
It's
If
not.
you look at it genuinely and you don't look at it in kind of an asinine philosophical way, then it should be, hey, I want to be happy, healthy, and productive, right? So I should let everyone else be happy, healthy, and productive. And that's a good idea. That's a good basis. But people are hyper rational and they want to dig things apart. So it should be more like treat other people in the way that they want to be treated within reason. Like, hey, I want to be treated where everybody sends me $100 million in cold hard cash and non-sequential unmarked bills. Is that going to happen? No, probably not, right? So it doesn't. The way you want to be treated is kind of ambiguous, and I think if you look at it in more like a laid back way, it's like you should generally treat people with respect and kindness. You should also have healthy boundaries up if they don't treat you with respect and kindness. You shouldn't really like let people treat you in a way that you don't want to be treated, and you should take steps to ensure that you're removing yourself from situations where people are treating you in a way that you don't like.
Well,
We can say, hey, it's bad that people want to chop your arms off and stuff, but it's also bad if you get one of your arms chopped off and you let him take the other one too, right? Like that's kind of probably not the way to do it if you like having arms, right? Are you a victim when someone chops your arms off? Yes. Do you want to remain a victim and continue getting your arms chopped off? No, probably not. So there's some degree of agency that you had. Everyone is going to have bad things happen to them. Not everyone is a good person. People probably at the core are genuinely good, but we live in a world where that's may be an unproductive thing to treat reality with, right? Like if there's a schizophrenic homeless person with a knife, should I like give them a hug and get in stabbing range? No, probably not. Once people become violent, once people start, or even start violating the basic laws of society, I do not personally think it's your responsibility to let yourself be a victim. I don't think that's productive, right?
hey,
There are certain
I
circumstances.
have to go, but thank you so much for answering the question, man. Take care.
Yeah, thank you for coming out. Take care.
Take care, man.
Let's see if we get another question.
Yeah, I got to run too. It was a really great chat. Thanks so much, Garrett. It's a pleasure chatting with you today.
Yeah, thanks. Take care.
You too. Take care, Sam.
We'll do it again
All
next
right.
week.
Take care.
Yeah, we'll do it
Great to
soon,
hear
yeah.
from you.
Yeah, great to see you. Bye, everybody.
Okay, so later. Mark says Hitler's army thought killing people was right. I guess their acts were moral, according to me. No, if you think that, you misunderstood what I'm saying, because the premise is probably don't kill people, I think, is the most simple rule. The so where things are, I would say that like the ethics of large scale conflict are slightly different than the ethics of normal human life. And I don't mean in this sense, like if we lived in a perfect world, no one would kill anyone. But let's say you're in Poland and there's an army coming to kill you and your family and friends, right? And take over your country and enslave you or something. Well, you cannot kill people and then let your family and friends be slaughtered, or you can defend yourself. Because again, my basic premise is once somebody breaks the laws of civil society, you start robbing, you start killing, um, then really you've said I disagree with the social contract and I no longer want to participate by these rules. So somebody attacks you. Other people may disagree with me about this, but you should defend yourself. You should defend your family and friends. You should defend your property. You should defend your freedom. You should defend, civil society. And you can try not doing that and then end up dead or enslaved or mutilated or any other number of horrible outcomes. But that's typically the way that I look at it. If I don't know, if America didn't get involved in World War II, the high likelihood is that we would have the Nazi states of Europe or something like that, or the fucking Third Reich. And I don't know about you. I don't want that outcome. That would be quite bad. Oh, those were someone else. Okay, sorry about that. Um, yeah, yeah. So I guess any closing questions? I'm down to do one more. Dual thinking takes place in Russia. There are people who think war is bad and support what their government is doing. Yeah, it's tricky because this is a really unpopular opinion, and I don't have a strong position on the conflict that's going on in Europe right now. But what I try to do, and doing this is actually very unpopular, but this is, if you want to talk about thinking outside of the box, this is a good way to do it. You should always, when you're doing an analysis of something, you're thinking critically, you should always assume first that whatever one side in a conflict is saying is true, right? It might not be true, but you don't know yet. And if you come in thinking you're already going to be wrong, right? You're never, ever, ever going to get the right answers without thinking about them, right? You might realize that the answer that you had was right, but if you don't know why it's right, it's very complicated. So, with regards to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that is not as simple as people make it out to be, in the sense that you have to understand a lot of things that are very complicated and difficult to understand. So, one of the things, let's say you have a neighborhood, right? Or not even a neighborhood. You have a street with houses on it, right? And there's one house that's here, one house that's here, and there's a house way down the street. You live in this house, and the guy that lives way down the street does not like you. You used to have like an ongoing blood feud with them. It's kind of calmed down, you know. Let's pretend that that's the Cold War, right? It's also, there was a lot of bad things that happened in the 1900s between a lot of countries, right? Where America is not innocent in any meaningful way, right? But anyway, so that house way down the street is America. This house over here is Russia. And you have Ukraine, who actually, they used to be family members, but they got divorced or something. So the house way over here really wants to put a guy with a gun, with a sniper rifle, just staring at your house right there. And you probably don't want to have someone with a gun looking at your house, right? So one of the things that happened, I'm not saying Russia was necessarily justified in this. I'm not trying to make moral judgments, but I am trying to look at both of these sides from the perspective of their point of view, rather than accepting whatever the narrative that people give you, because it's always biased. If there's a story that's in the news, there's a 90% chance that someone paid for that story to be there, or there's some intelligence agency working on crafting a narrative and playing propaganda games. Propaganda is a two-way street, right? So Russia's argument is ultimately that NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Union or organization, right? Trade organization, treaty organization, something like that. The North Atlantic is quite far from Ukraine. If you've ever seen a map, it's very very far away. It's not really anywhere near it. So they were trying to have Ukraine join NATO, which would basically mean that you have an organization that really benefits America in the West, right? With guns on the border of Russia, which would be again like having someone with a sniper rifle that does not like you in your neighbor's house, staring at you all day, right? Which is not a cool thing to do. Russia, I think, because they have this position of being like they're pretty beat up after communism. They're really not like a superpower. China is becoming a superpower, but I think Russia's not really a superpower outside of having nukes. And so Russia doesn't want this to happen because it's a forward front in the event if America ever wanted to attack. It's kind of like having why China does stuff with North Korea because America is allies with South Korea, and thus it is a buffer between having a forward base on your border, which is generally bad strategy. If you ever played Risk, it's not how you want the game to go, right? So Russia basically, this is where things become problematic, and this is where war is much more complicated than human conflict. So if you're at a bar and I punch you in the face, right? There's a non-zero chance that I punch you in the face and you get knocked out and you fall down and you hit your head on the bar or you hit your head on the ground and you die, right? Like every single conflict, every single violent conflict can end in death, no matter what. If you start a fight, you are the person who is responsible for the fight happening. If you never throw a punch and somebody else starts the fight, well, you don't have the option to not be in a fight now, or you can let them beat your ass and potentially kill you if you want. I don't personally, but once someone has started a fight, the fight is happening. It's the fault of the person who is the aggressor, right? They did it. Now, there are different arguments you can make about, hey, if I'm in a bar and I'm calling people names and expletives and talking shit and acting in an aggressive manner, does that constitute starting a fight? If I, as a reasonable person and not a philosopher, I would say, yeah, probably. If you're walking around yelling at people and being threatening and aggressive and rude, you probably should get punched in the face. But from a game theory perspective, the person who throws the punch should at least accept responsibility for the outcomes of violence, which is generally not great, right? Hitler invades Poland, he started World War II, right? If you start the fight, you're responsible for it. So in this case, is American American and Western forces trying to build a forward base against your country? Is that an act of aggression? Debatable. Russia would say it is. America would say no, it's totally normal. We can do whatever we want. Debatable. Russia, however, started the fight officially, right? Is that there's a whole like it's very different in war because it's a lot more complicated. Like I would even argue that China buying up American real estate not an act of like Cold War, right? I mean, we're certainly in a Cold War with China that's not that cold, but it's certainly not a military conflict yet. But it's hard to say with these things because it's not as simple as a bar fight, right? If you're a country that like doesn't want to participate in the Western way of life, which is like extreme consumerism and getting rid of traditional values and a lot of things that a lot of people don't really care for. Having people move military operations closer to your country, and ostensibly their goal is to at least have some kind of cultural exports where if maybe you don't want your kids watching like I don't know, like what's that shit? Not like Shameless or Euphoria, which are like really nihilistic consumerist nightmare shows. Maybe you don't want degenerate Western culture or something, right? So it's hard to say in that regard. It's prohibited from calling it war. Yeah, it's a tactical military action or something stupid. So in one sense, I think it would be naive to say that the West doesn't have some kind of responsibility for what's happening. And the West accepts that because they're all funding this thing. And I think the West is funding it because it's easier for them to throw infinite money at Ukraine than it is to start a real war, right? And I think if a major nation if America sent troops, it becomes a war, right? And that outcome is potentially the worst possible outcome, because then we have World War III, except it's World War III where everyone has nukes, and it's World War III where global supply chains could be disrupted and people will starve, people will die, people will be raped, people will be civilians will be killed. So that's quite bad. America not escalating is probably a good thing, although them funding it is frankly almost the same thing. But that's just kind of the way that politics work. It's technically different. And I think there's the real threat of nuclear weapons being used. However, if we learned anything during the Cold War, it's that the best way to use nuclear weapons is not to use them because of mutually assured destruction. So it's hard to say. And it's also tricky because, especially when you get into Europe, everybody owned every country at some point. Russia technically used to own Ukraine. It used to own Crimea. There's a lot of these countries that were part of the USSR or different versions of Russia over time. But that's one of those things. It's like I don't want to get into like when you get into like sovereign nation politics are very, very different from like internal country politics. So like generally people have a loose understanding of like Democrats versus Republicans. But when you get into like the way that politics work for countries, it's very, very different, because there's not really like, you have the UN, but the UN isn't really not really, they're not like really a power in the sense that the UN isn't going to just say, "Hey, you broke the law. We're going to stop you." Like, they have security forces that are made up of other nations. It's not like a military might that can stop you from doing shit. So in the metaphor of the bar, if everyone in the bar agrees, "Hey, we're going to have a security guard at the bar," but everyone in the bar is actually like a fucking UFC fighter, right? And the security guard's like kind of like just a big chubby dude, right? Maybe he can stop you from doing stuff if everyone agrees. Like, the UN works when everyone gets along, but it's not like the UN is like Chuck Liddell, who can just like come in and beat anyone who starts a fight. It doesn't really work like that, right? And so you have Ukraine, who's like a small dude that everybody else is like kind of like hyping up the fight, and they're kind of like pushing him back, like, "Oh no, it's cool, we got your back, but we're not gonna actually join the fight." And then Russia's over here. Russia's like, I don't know, pick another UFC fighter like Jose Aldo or something. So it's complicated. Geopolitics is much more complicated because we can talk about abstract morality, we can talk about principles and stuff. And in a perfect world, probably people aren't aggressing. But even outside of overt military conflict, there is psychological warfare, there's media manipulation, there's cultural warfare, and all of these things. And people should have the ability to not participate in Western culture if they want to. The West doesn't like that. America routinely sends in intelligence agencies and funds paramilitary organizations to overthrow democratically elected governments. They overthrow communists, they overthrow lots of things. I don't like communists, but should the government do that? Doesn't matter. They do that, right? They shouldn't do it, but they do, and they are never going to get checked doing that because there's not a bigger guy in the bar, right, to stop them. So it's complicated. I don't think Russia is. Russia's certainly guilty. I think the West is also guilty. I think this is what happens in fights. There are rarely fights with mutual combatants where no one is guilty at all, right? If, like I said, if you walk into the bar and taunt someone and say, "Oh, I'm going to kill you," you're probably justified in attacking that guy, right? But you're still responsible for what happens because you started the fight. But if you think there's a legitimate threat to your life, like, well, you want to find out if it's real, you can be dead and have not done anything, right? So it's complicated. Global politics, global military politics, and sovereign nation conflict politics are very, very complicated and much, much, much harder to sort out because it's never black and white. It doesn't matter. It's never black and white. The last ostensibly black and white conflict that we had and probably will ever have is World War II, where it's like, hey, well, there are death camps and lots of horrible things happening. We probably should go do something about that. And they're invading a lot of sovereign nations. And look at France. France got fucked, right? So yeah, I'm not gonna draw strong conclusions. I certainly do not trust the West's narrative. I don't trust Russia's narrative, but what we can do is look at both of these in a charitable way and try to figure out where the truth is, because probably parts of both of these things are true. And if you just accept one person or another person's narrative, you're probably going to be wrong, because the truth is, in global things, the truth is always complicated and it's always nuanced. So, should we defend the Ukrainians? Yeah, I don't think the Ukrainians asked for it, right? Is America defending the Ukrainians an act of war? Potentially. It's really complicated. Like, on the one hand, historically, if you let Hitler take over Poland, he's going to keep taking over countries. Maybe Putin's Hitler-esque, maybe he isn't. I don't think I don't personally think he is. He doesn't seem like an empire guy to me, but the media would tell you that Putin's literally Hitler and all this stuff. So I don't know, but I, as a philosopher, think it's important to have. Now, Ukrainians asked for help. They also wanted to join NATO, but it's complicated, right? So my major point, again, I don't necessarily have a dog in this fight. I probably still don't know enough about the conflict to make an accurate judgment, and it's very hard to when there's a huge propaganda push on both sides, right? I don't think it's good for Ukrainians that they're being invaded. I think that's the most straightforward thing, is that it's not, generally military aggression seems to be a net bad. But also, there are other things that you could do. I really think the West should just cut Russia off entirely. Like, hey, there literally nobody's allowed to trade with them at all. And they're trying to do that, but there are energy problems with like Germany and stuff like that. So it's never as simple as you think, is all I would say. And maybe that's the problem with doing philosophy, is everything gets more complicated before it gets simpler. But yeah, micropolitics are much easier to deal with. The average person, honestly, has very little to do with that conflict, and it probably doesn't benefit your life to do very much with it. Like, I'm not a general, I'm not a strategic advisor or something. So I try to focus on things that I can control, which is like me, my life, trying to be a good person, trying to do good work. And if you do those things, that's the best that you can really do, unless you're going to go like get on the front lines like the Reddit people did. And I don't know. So that I guess that would be all I would say. And I'd be down to do one little topic change so we don't end on that note. If anyone has one last little bit.
We got a lot of great questions today. This was, like I anticipated, one of the best philosophy sessions we've had so far. So that's in a large part due to your all's engagement. I really appreciate it. Come back next week. We have the events in the event tab top left, and you can also continue the discussion here. But we want to make sure you check out Garrett's site. Give him some support on Twitter. He's very active on Twitter. Posts all the time. Great content. And read some of his articles. He's an amazing writer. So you like listening to him talk? Listen to some of the stuff he's written, or read some of the stuff he's written. Use your eyes.
I'm sharing my blog
Nobody reads anymore. Yeah, I posted the one about the pizza necessity of philosophy up there.
Yeah, so just for anyone reading, if you go on there are 4 categories. One of them is Master Self, one of them is Ion Media, one of them is Liver Rex, and one of them is Ion Enterprises. So Master Self is all my old stuff. That is probably, if you started there and went from the beginning forward, that's the most straightforward. The other ones are Ion Enterprises, the business philosophy stuff, so that's more recent. And then these ones are fine. Those were email lists that I ran for a while, so those are kind of like, there's not a lot of content there. So what I would recommend, if you really want to dive into it, I have like 160 or some articles, so it's not easy to do. But Master Self stuff is probably the most applicable if you want to learn about personal philosophy and kind of world working stuff. And then Ion Enterprises stuff is the most applicable to business philosophy. There's not that much of it. So, because I haven't written that much recently, but yeah, if you want to, I will share links to Amazon. You can buy the book versions of Master Self.
I have them.
There are 2. Oh yeah, you do. And actually, I think
there's also a free ebook too, the Gravity ebook.
Yeah.
But that's totally. We'll share that on Thursdays. You got to come tomorrow to the marketing workshop.
So if you do read them, though, the easiest way to read them is in the book form. I will also, you can get the physical one, and I'll also upload if I can find them, the ebooks of the blog, because there's some clickbaity things that I tried doing for a little bit that that are just not like philosophy articles that I took out. Let me figure out where I have this stuff. I need to open Creative Cloud, I think, because it's in my saved stuff. Yeah, if you bear with me for a little bit, you can have the free ebook versions of the physical books. It's easier to read them like that because they're in order. So, and there's a lot of little simplifications and stuff I did because there's a lot of like hyperlinks and shit in the other books that might be dead or something. Why can't I find this?
Just so y'all are aware, those who are still listening and watching, there are events almost every single day. So if you're on Twitch or watching on YouTube after the event, go to discord.gg/Triba to check out the rest of our content. We stream it 4 out of the 5 business days, so you can always check in on the stream and see what's going on at noon Eastern time. But we highly recommend you get in here and join the discussion in the Discord channels, because it's always much more personal and friendly. You know, just it's a better environment than just sharing it via Twitch, but it's an option you have. And share the stream, share the Discord with other people who are interested in business, philosophy, branding, investing, marketing, all those topics we cover on a regular basis with our workshops, including live streaming, if you want to know how to do what we do. And yeah, that's basically my pitch for Triba. Better than Twitch? Oh, hell yeah. That's what I do in my spare time, actually. I stream in my wife's Discord with her, and we'll stream to Twitch and she'll get like 5-6 viewers. We'll stream on Discord just for the Discord, and we'll get like a dozen people in there in like an hour, and everyone's hanging out watching multiple different streams. It's way better than Twitch. Just needs a recording feature. If we had a clipping and recording feature, even just a rewind like last minute on Discord, they'd blow Twitch out of the water, man. They'd blow them out of the water.
I'm having trouble finding this, but I am gonna find it for you guys. So if anybody wants, then just bear with me while I try and figure this out, because I have no idea how to find this folder with my ebooks in it. Oh, you know what? I have them on Google Drive, so I'm gonna download them and I'll upload them. So the moral of the story is, if you wait, you'll get about 800 pages of book for free. So
sounds worth it to me. If you're gonna read 800 pages, props to you. I wish I had time to read more right now, to be honest. It's tough with 2 kids. I don't even know how I get work done some days. Anybody else got kids? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Reading club? We've tried a reading club before. We've also tried to integrate it with the philosophy club. People are just lazy, I think. Or maybe there wasn't enough structure to it. If someone wants to take on the task of assigning a book and having questions on it, we could have a forum style section for this. But I would need help with it, yeah. There's also external reading clubs, so I mean, if we find a way to do it better and just integrate something, that's ideal. Don't like rebuilding the wheel. But yeah, everybody who has ideas, drop them in feedback. Don't worry about tagging me. If you've got a good suggestion, tag me.
All right, there you go. There's year 1 and year 2. The first one is like 200 pages. The second one's like 500. So, all right, good talk,
and
everybody.
A little teaser: we are working on the Triba subscription tiers for support and to get access to a compilation of all the resources that are already being offered for free. So, I mean, it's not like you're getting extra resources there, but you're also getting discounts from our verified providers on business services. So that's just a little teaser. We're working on it in the background. 2023 is going to be awesome. Nothing that's free. You guys can all still access the free stuff we do now, these workshops included, but we're going to add extra content and cool stuff. So pay attention, follow the announcements channel to get updates, and make sure you choose your roles. I updated it to buttons. You still have all your roles, but if you haven't selected good roles yet, you can go toggle them on and off in the tags channel so that you get pings for specific events and workshops and stuff like this. The buttons are slick, thanks B. And thanks Garrett again. What an incredible discussion. He does these just off the cuff, on the fly. And it's pretty awesome to watch and listen in, and your questions are all appreciated. So we'll catch you all tomorrow for the marketing and social media updates and news. Some really interesting stuff happening with Twitter, and we're excited to start branching into that more with some of the content we're making. So tune in next week. Next week for this. That's all for today, Twitch. We'll catch y'all later. And YouTube. Can't leave out our YouTube fans. Peace. Side note, we're back. We're still live. Zachary is here. He's relatively new to the Triba community, but a good friend of mine, and he's been developing a game on Unreal Engine that we're excited to talk about and work on live in Discord. So he's going to be hanging out in here with me and just building this world for this little magical creature. You'll get to see some of the thought process behind the development, and if you guys have a project or something you're working on, Jeff, definitely stop in and we'll talk about it. It's just going to be a hangout while we're doing different development projects. I consider myself a developer on Discord because it's not programming necessarily. There's some, but it's really like connecting all the dots, putting all the integrations together. I think that's the future of programming, is becoming more developer based. Low code, no code tools. Yeah, exactly. So I think we'll also have like a session on bots, Discord bots. I know a lot of y'all are actually already working on stuff, and we got some community projects in the works, but I think that was just a good start, creating the buttons. So we're going to make it more and more customized to the user journey. So stay tuned. That's all. I'm going to transition back, but thanks for listening, guys.